Maybe you've seen that video by Boston Robotics in which a bunch of autonomous robots dance the mashed potato and, just sort of in tandem and in large groups dance around in this kind of cute way and seemingly non-threatening. But you've also seen Terminator and Blade Runner and iRobot and RoboCop. Is it possible that these seemingly cute helpers that could help in industry and so forth could actually be weaponized and turned loose? That turns out to be much more sort of realistic a situation than you might have imagined. It's not just the stuff of science fiction anymore. In fact, the non-government organization Human Rights Watch has issued a recommended ban on all such research, suggesting that work on autonomous robots should be curtailed dramatically and, if not totally banned. So today we're going to talk about what are the real possibilities of AI agency, what are the real possibilities of AI takeover, and what are the real fears of robotic takeover. So without further ado, killer robots. So here's the first image that we're going to draw. It's a charcoal one, and it's sort of nostalgic and not designed to be intimidating. And this one, alternatively, is rather more scary, based in a way on that sort of Boston Dynamics robotics stuff. So here you see me penciling in sort of the basic sketch for this drawing, and then I'm going to come into it with charcoal, a combination of black and white charcoal. And it turns out, on this toned paper, it's really a nice effect. So I had a lot of fun doing this, and I looked for kind of fun, humorous-looking, robots from the 1950s, and I found some kind of hilarious photographs of toys. But what I want to do is also talk a little bit about the serious side here, which is what are the types of AI that people are pursuing. A lot of us are afraid of AI and don't really know much about it because we're getting most of our information from movies. The ideals of AI are usually one of three things: analytic AI, which means sort of cognitive problem solving; human AI, which would be cognitive, emotional, and social problem solving; and then humanized artificial intelligence, meaning that you'd have all those abilities, but also you'd have some kind of self-consciousness. And would there be such a development of AI technology in the near future? Some people will sort of break this down along the lines of weak AI and strong AI. Weak AI just means, can we devise robots that solve limited problems well? And the answer to that question is yes, and we've got amazing weak AI, which can basically function as Google word searches, voice recognition software, and so on. But strong AI is the idea that you could make a general intelligence that could solve all kinds of problems that it had never encountered before. Now, we have not actually developed general AI in this sense, and so that's still a long way off. It's definitely the holy grail of AI programmers, but we're nowhere near that. If we did develop a general AI, we might be able to detect it via the Turing test. So Alan Turing said, how would we know if we had a kind of general intelligence consciousness in a computer? And he thought, well, you do a test where you're talking to someone on a keyboard, and the question is, are you talking to a real person or are you talking to a very high-functioning AI? And if you can't decide or tell the difference, then in a sense that computer, if it is in fact just a computer, has actually evolved to such a high degree that it can be admitted into the consciousness club. And in a sense it is now conscious in the way that you and I are. That would be passing the Turing test. And many people have suggested that that's still a long way off, and others have suggested that it's already happened. So that's an interesting debate. They sometimes run the Turing test in places like Cambridge and MIT. Steve Wozniak, if you recall, from Apple, actually devised what he called the coffee test of AI general intelligence. He said, can an AI robot enter the average kitchen and without pre-programming solve all the little problems involved to make a cup of coffee? In other words, he said, well, thinking about AI in terms of like chess playing and talking in a computer is one thing, but what about real-world problem solving with all the sort of micro problems that have to be worked out in detail? So he thought that you had to have real-world cases to determine whether or not general intelligence had actually been achieved. This, I think, is a point of confusion for many people, because the assumption is that if a robot can do things very sophisticated and have behaviors that are complex, then it must be having complex mental imagery and representations and have its own agenda, and that's simply not the case. We don't have any evidence that any kind of AI, whether it's a robot or whether it's in a computer, has achieved anything like consciousness or awareness, and especially anything like self-consciousness. For one thing, you have what's called the hard problem, which is feeling something and thinking something is a very subjective reality. It's not sort of just the result of machinery. It appears to be something unique to, if not human beings, it seems to be unique to animals of a certain level. We don't know whether insects have this kind of level of subjectivity and self-awareness, but we know that many mammals do. And we don't have anything like that in current AI or robotics. Everything is still very much simple machine functioning. We're using things like neural networks, of course, and learning, but all guided by human intelligence. Now, what are the main sort of challenges to AI? I've listed a number of them here. Let me go through these very briefly. Cognitive drives, what I'm calling animal motivation and directionality. A lot of people think of intelligence as just sort of chess solving writ large across the world, but in fact, all of your thinking is driven by what Spinoza called conatus, or striving. You feel a drive, an affective or emotional drive towards something because you want it, or away from something because you're afraid of it. And all thinking requires this, and we have no idea how to program that. And almost no one is looking at this problem in AI, so I think this is going to be a pretty damning problem for the future. Related to that are just the emotions: fear, lust, care. We don't know how to compute emotions at all. The imagination is a huge part of the human operating system and arguably the animal operating system, and yet we don't know how to work it in AI. We can sort of introduce sort of novelty, but we don't understand the imagination enough in humans to sort of program it in robots. Sentience is just the feeling. What does a pain feel like, rather than just a stimulus response machine mechanism? It actually feels like something to us to be in pain or to feel pleasure, and we don't know how to program that. Self-consciousness, as I said, seems way off. Seems to be it's a needed awareness that you are something as opposed to another object in the world, and that you have interests. And then finally, the way that the mind works, or the brain, is through biological causation. And this is something that we simply don't understand if we're using a purely digital system of on, off, ones and zeros. It doesn't translate entirely to the sort of cascading volumetric causation that you find in biology. So those are major stumbling blocks for AI sophistication and sort of autonomous robot takeover. But that doesn't mean these can't be surmounted. Some of them may just be practical problems that we haven't really solved yet, and some of them may be problems in principle, which will never be solved. The jury's out on that. Here, just to return to the drawing briefly, I'm going in with some white charcoal now, and when you add that white charcoal to that toned paper, it really pops off the page. And I've been using a blending stump here, which you've been watching. Once you get your charcoal down on the paper, the blending stump really helps to lock it into the tooth of the paper, and then it also fuzzes out the resolution, giving it a warmer quality to the drawing. So I highly recommend using a blending stump when you're working with charcoal. And so here we are, sort of coming into the final drawing, and I'm fairly pleased with how this turned out. It's certainly not intimidating. These guys don't seem like they're going to be too much trouble for us, but I thought it was kind of a fun throwback to the 1950s style of the killer robot. All right, so let's ask ourselves now more realistically, what are the dangers of AI if they're not sort of becoming conscious in the way we are? Well, one danger is what's called the breakout problem. And this is fast adapting and evolving viruses that just get into the system and mess up the whole system because they reproduce rapidly. Another way is unconscious hyper-efficiency that diminishes humanity and ecology. In other words, you could create a robot that just makes really good paper clips, but it becomes so trained on making better paper clips that it actually neutralizes our military, ruins our economy, and does a whole variety of other unintended consequences just to make a better paper clip. That's a serious breakout problem that we might actually have. And then here I'm sort of doing a more realistic or frightening version of the killer robots based on the Boston Dynamics robots that we've seen dancing the mashed potato and so forth. I've tried to make them much more ominous here, as you can see. And this is a digital drawing on the iPad using the Procreate software. But the final fear, I think, of robotics is that somehow they will achieve real self-consciousness and that they'll want to live, and their flourishing comes at the cost of human life. So that's the sort of Terminator Matrix type scenario, and again I suggest to you that this is way far away. Nonetheless, there are real problems with fully autonomous weapons. These things, which are being developed by many countries, they can select and engage targets without human control. And, you know, the US is developing these, China is developing these. They're already working on sophisticated armed drones that have facial recognition. And Human Rights Watch suggests that autonomous killer robots will fail to meet the international law standards, so they won't be able to make distinctions about who is an enemy combatant and who is a citizen. They basically won't understand proportionality, like the threat response proportionality, and they won't basically understand when military is absolutely necessary. So they're calling for this preemptive ban on development of killer robots, and there's currently a campaign to stop killer robots supported by 30 countries and many NGOs and 4,000 AI experts, I think over 25 Nobel laureates, and even 61% of the general public is afraid of the possibility of killer robots, and so they're suggesting that we should, if not ban it, at least curtail the research. So what are the problems here? One is basically that the facial recognition technology will pick out, a face or some other physiognomic profile, and then the autonomous weapon would quote-unquote decide who lives and who dies without further human intervention. And obviously if robots lack cognitive and emotional ability to feel compassion or empathy, then they can't make moral judgments. So that's a huge problem. Also, they would replace troops with machines, and that might make the decision to go to war much easier, escalating political violence. Additionally, robots could be used outside war conditions, including the suppression of protest and sort of propping up unjust power regimes. And also, failures or glitches in the programming could result in inadvertent killing of innocents and even, this breakout problem I was describing before. Another kind of killer robot might not be out in the world running around like a soldier, but might actually be inside your head. Elon Musk acquired a small business called Neuralink, which is developing a chip that they can add to your brain. It's a read and write chip that can sort of understand your synaptic connections, and actually you can control it with maybe your phone or some external device, and it can release neurotransmitters into your brain or actually operate your motor system independent of the usual pathways. Now, what if this thing actually got out of control and could actually manipulate your own behavior? And this is a frightening possibility of killer robots that actually might be living within us as part of our bioenhancement. All right, so that's enough to scare anybody, and probably enough for today's episode on killer robots. I hope you enjoyed it. Please hit the subscribe button and come back for more content every week or so. All right, see you then. Cheers.